Hey, this is my presentation about Chapter 8 from Marcia Henry's Unlocking Literacy. Chapter 8 was not that long, so I give a lot of background info, and it's a little bit long, so I'm going to be talking very quickly. I need to be fully honest. My daughter was just had nothing to do and said, "Can I make backgrounds for your slides?" And I said, "Yes." So you'll be able to tell when it's an 11-year-old. This one looks nice. So first thing I want to say is this book rules. It would be a tragedy to only read one chapter for this assignment. I'm hoping everyone reads chapters 1, 2, and 3, and then sort of makes a Bible out of, no offense to people who I shouldn't say Bible. The appendices are incredibly valuable. She has synthesized so much information from so many sources, and it's super up to date, even though I think it's from 2010. It's fantastic. I'm sure you know. I want to differentiate ad infinitum. I am a tutor, not a teacher, so I will probably suggest things that would be extremely difficult to do in the classroom. I'm also super immersed in structured word inquiry right now, so that's where I'm coming from. So according to this book, literacy teaching needs to be systematic, structured, sequential, and multisensory. And if you Google that, you get a lot of different places saying it, but not very many people defining it. To my brain, it seemed redundant. And I was like, I got to figure out what this is. What I do know for sure is that it was not that way for me. Reading teaching was not that way. Basically, you had this pendulum swing from whole language to phonics based, as if those two things should be separate. So in the 90s, whole language took a bunch of children and a bunch of good books, threw them in a kettle and said, hey, you're gonna read now, yay. And then they went, oh my gosh, this isn't working. So back to phonics, and it was all phonics all the time. So what's the alphabetic principle? What is grapheme phoneme correspondence? How can you identify the sound this letter can make, even if it's not really the sound this letter makes? And they did that, and they drilled it, and they killed it, and then they threw everybody into a pot with a bunch of good books and said, I hope you can read now. So both of these are lame. The dirty little secret is, it's not a dirty little secret. It's very hard to teach something that you don't know how you learned. It's very hard to teach something that you don't know how you learned it. So, I mean, think about this. If you're an autistic kid who can't read social cues, the people around you who did not learn to read social cues on purpose are not very good at teaching you how to read social cues, right? So they need to actually either learn how that is learned or leave that teaching to someone else. Same thing, Common Core math. Unfortunately, I got to tell you, Common Core math was genius. It's so well designed. It was completely up to date. But if you're teaching it and it's a way of learning math that you did not learn, it is very difficult to teach that effectively. And people were doing this very exploratory thing in this very rote, instructional manner, and it kind of bombed. So same thing here with reading. If you learned, like me, to read in a kettle full of books, I had not that much phonics. If you had a lot of phonics, but then were just dumped, oh, you'll magically be good at all the other reading skills. Now we're going to teach you higher order thinking. You probably need to subject your own reading learning process to careful deconstructive analysis. You probably need to study English orthography, phonology, morphology, orthography in depth. And indispensably, you probably have to engage in the multisensory activities you intend to have students do. My feeling is that those of us like me who succeeded in spelling just because spellings are sticky for our brains have no business teaching kids for whom spellings are not sticky, unless we rigorously unpack how spelling works and how it can be intentionally learned. Otherwise, we will torture them accidentally. We should not do that. So systematic means not random. Structured means also not random, but in a different way. So obviously you have a system to do it. Structured, you're not going from here to here to here, you're going from here to here to here. There's a structure to how you do it, but the sequential part is more valuable to me. I see, we're going to start with easy and then we're going to move to hard. Okay. Concepts we teach are built on the previous concept, and then the next concept is built on both of those. So that makes sense to me. I understand what we mean by sequential. I also got into, from the IDA website, it needs to be analytic and synthetic. And I find this to be definitely true. We don't want to simply give them words and have them break them apart into morphemes and graphemes. We also want to give them morphemes and graphemes and have them synthesize words, right? So they're constructing and deconstructing. They're analyzing and synthesizing. That's really important. Some kids will click on one or the other much more. And of course, it has to be cumulative. Your teaching needs to check if it's being retained, because if this is foundational to the next thing, if this one faded away, then the next thing has not got any foundation and it's all going to floof away. Fluff, floof away. I think we all understand multisensory means visual, auditory, kinesthetic. I think it's important to note that a lot of times the kinesthetic piece disappears after first, second grade. And I think that's wrong. I think we need to keep things kinesthetic all through school, just like I think younger kids should be able to do things that are considered older kid activities if they're up to the challenge. It's all very arbitrary to me. With older students, a lot of time the thing that comes before giving them multisensory things is simply getting them to be active learners, right? So they come in very passive. And so we do an I, we, you format. So I show them, they get to be passive like they like, so then they get comfortable. And then we do it. So I'm spotting them very carefully. They don't feel wrong very often. And then they do it. And usually it's actually 5 things. I do it, we do it, mostly me, we do it 50-50, we do it mostly them, and then they do it. And you can be very kinesthetic with this stuff, teaching morphology if you're having them manipulate morphemes. On paper, you've got, pre, re, not shun, yun, and full, and they're doing that with their hands, putting those things together. So I really dislike that she refers to outlaw, red flag, or weirdo words. This is a very Natasha background. Please know, study the etymology, right? There's a reason why those spellings are crazy. They're crazy because they have a history, and that's how they got that way. It's much more memorable to study a story than it is to study an exception. This is a random misspelled word, non-phonetic word. It's just an outlaw. No, there's a reason why it's there, especially these Anglo-Saxon words. And here's a place where I think the sequence kind of breaks down in Marcia Henry's system. The Anglo-Saxon words have some of the weirdest spellings, and yet they're also the most common words. So she wants us to start with the common words that the kids know. But if they've already learned to spell phonetically, they may actually do better learning morphemes with Latin and Greek words because they're more phonetically consistent. So for me, that means stick to Marcia Henry's suggestions, do them in that order, but let the kids, if the kid wants to do a Greek word, if they're like, what about this word? What about this word? Let them do it. And I would also consider moving into Latin words sooner, probably. But 3rd grade sounds pretty good, actually. So another minor issue, and this probably isn't what she means. She's just presenting the lesson, basically, teach them these things, and then here are the activities. It's a logical structure for her book. But I would much prefer if we did more exploration. So for instance, she says we should teach them about the hard and soft G. What are the patterns that cause a G to be good? And what are the patterns that cause a G to be j? Well, rather than show them, I would say, hey, give me some G words. What are some words that start with G? Oh, look, some of these you say good, and some of them you say j. Are there any patterns that we see here? When do you say which one? And as soon as someone notices a pattern, that becomes our rule. Because we want our rules to be scientifically derived, meaning we use the examples that we have to guess what the rule is, knowing that we will update that rule as soon as we have exceptions. So our rules are always, just like in science, like theories, they are waiting for the next better theory to come along. This allows me to be not an expert on morphemes and teaching it. We're all exploring this together. I really don't think Marcia Henry means to say not to do this. I just would lean more in this direction whenever possible, while using the structure to make sure nothing's left out that's conceptually foundational to the next thing. So chapter 8 is about teaching competent readers more Greek and Latin roots. I'm going to read this too. It's packed with wonderful activities for older students. I just can't bear the thought of younger students hearing that they aren't ready to explore the morphology of words that they are curious about, or teachers believing that about them because the words have more advanced Greek and Latin roots. Nonsense. Marcia Henry's carefully constructed sequence can guide instruction, but it should do so in tandem with a spirit of inquiry that rejects simplistic overgeneralizations of age appropriateness in the curriculum. That's a mouthful. I'm saying let the kids surprise us and let them really own their learning whenever possible. So wait, why are we learning all these basics? Why are we even doing this? Well, if you decode and encode phonetically, you're going to need to memorize somewhere between 15 and 50% of the roughly 170,000 words we use all the time. So like when you get up to the 50%, it's like, really that many? I thought it was more like 15%. Well, if you look at the words that have a schwa in them or two, those could be any vowel, right? Any vowel could represent those schwas. So for a lot of dyslexic students, there are lots of ways to make mistakes in about half the words. On the other hand, once you learn about 130 morphemes, you have the raw material for encoding and decoding many thousands of words, and the orthographic rules for joining morphemes are much more consistent than pronunciation rules will ever be. I can travel 100 miles and the pronunciation rules will change. The morpheme rules won't. So going deeper into Latin roots, her example happens to parallel something that just happened with me 4 days ago now. So this kid, truly the hour when he was compelled to develop a composition seemed the longest and grimmest of the whole week. He's using the rules that he remembers as best he can to basically phonetically encode. He gets 5 months of an hour a week and is taught cursive, and it looks like this. The teacher dictated this to him and he wrote, truly the hour when he was compelled to develop a composition seemed the longest and grimmest of the whole week. I had a student, not quite as intense as this, a student I was working with this summer. I saw him for 13 sessions, and this was actually in the 12th session. Just for the heck of it, I said, hey, this isn't a test, but I'm gonna give you some words that we haven't studied, but we've studied all the parts of. So we studied the base, fuse, struct, side, mort, and dict. But we never looked specifically at refusing. We looked at re, and we looked at ing, and we looked at in, and we looked at eons, in and eight, and and im. Anyway, so I just gave him these words, and I said, try to spell them with the morphemes. Don't try to sound them out. Try to spell them with the morphemes. And he went, oh, okay. And he went re and wrote re, fuse, F-U-S-E, ing, I-N-G. Oh, you have to drop the E because it's replaced by the I-N-G. And instructions, I asked him what this was. He said it was a U. In considerate, he couldn't remember that side was the base. So he put a T here initially. And then I told him, oh, side's the base. And this super dyslexic kid spelled a 13-letter word with that one tiny error. And my favorite part was this. He wrote I am, and then he stopped. And then he went, oh, and he wrote M-O-R-T-A-L-I-T-Y. And I said, hey, why did you stop when you wrote immortality? He's like, well, because I thought there was maybe one M, but then I realized that would mean the prefix was the letter I. And there's no prefix I don't think, but im means not. So we need an M for the im, and we need an M for the mort, which is exactly how morphemes work. There are specific doubling rules that come up, but what he said is exactly right. You can't have an I by itself as a morpheme with it sharing the M with mort. So that's how you know there are two M's in immortality. Would you have spelled that right? Anyway, this was really exciting. He said, this was the most fun I've ever had on a spelling test. I can't believe how easy that was. And boom, he's on his way. And he's now very willing to study on his own, which is coming up in a minute here. So in chapter 8, Marcia Henry introduces bases like sieve, dent, loc, rect, tract, trib, ver, and it's incredibly valuable. But wait, my student only learned about 50 affixes and bases during the 13 sessions we had this summer. We need him to learn 130, and now I'm going to be seeing him for an hour a week, most weeks. That's going to be very slow, isn't it? Linda Mood Bell has students seeing 10 hours a week, 5 hours, 2 hours, 5 days. How can we compete with that? Well, I realized that once you teach them these rules and find that they are sticky, which for this student, they were amazingly sticky, much more so than just spellings were, he was willing to do practice at home. So he's got flashcards, or in his case, Quizlet, and he's going to review the learned affixes and bases 5 to 10 minutes a day. And I'm getting him to be more active. In addition to saying the meaning, he's going to try to think of a few examples of words. So he's going to say again, redo, revisit, review. And then each time he studies, he's going to add a couple new bases. And he's going to try to think of words with those bases. Anyway, this is a whole process which you can review if you want. But I'm going to keep moving. Marcia Henry also suggests you do word matrices with student matrices. Should that say matrices? Oh, that's funny. Yeah, anyway. So dict means say, and then we build what are the possible prefixes, what are the possible suffixes. I will say in structured word inquiry and Pete Bowers, WordWorks Kingston, he would tell us not to have the dashes, because the dashes tell you where you might connect things, but when it's in a word matrix, you don't need them. And it makes it more confusing. This over here is called a word sum. So you've got dict plus the suffix ate plus ION. I'm sorry, you've got DICT, you've got DICT plus ATE plus ION, and that is written as dictation. And the E is replaced by the ION. Okay. I still have more to learn about these word webs. I just did a quick one myself for Finn. Learned that refinance is not related to refine. Refine, the root is fine. Refinance, the root is fin, meaning end. Fine means special, fancy. But I don't actually understand why we organize them by stems, by the beginnings. It makes my brain hurt a little bit. I need to learn more about why that's the way it is. She says, suggests as an activity, making Shakespeare more accessible. So I was like, really? And I looked up A Midsummer Night's Dream, Act 1, Scene 1, just grab the first paragraph. So as long as you know fair, basically I wanted to pull out the words that a student who's been studying morphology would recognize at least parts of, right? So here's what happens. So they see NUPTIAL with only phonics, they're just trying to sound it out, and it doesn't actually do them any good with understanding or meaning. They'd be like nuptial, or maybe it's nuptial, and that's it. They're like, I don't know what that is. Maybe they look at the context to try to figure out what it is. It doesn't help too much. But a kid who's been studying morphology will recognize the IAL, meaning related to, like facial and imperial and radial. And he or she also knows that they also know that they make adjectives. And if you know that IAL is a morpheme, then you also know that nupt has to be the base, because there's only one vowel there. So nupt is the base. I use base instead of root because root technically means the old form, and this is the current form. So we call that a base. That's what you would see in the middle of a modern word. So a lot of people are going to say, well, if they just look up nupt and find wedding, how's that different from looking up nuptial? Well, if you look up nuptial, as soon as you see it, you're like, I don't know. And you just feel stupid. But if you look at it and you go, oh, I recognize this part, but I need to know that part. It's a much more empowered place. It's interesting, and there's hope in it, and you don't feel dumb. So if you're interested in this, again, you can come back. All the stuff on the right is me imagining what students in morphology study would do. I've seen things like them, but I just made that stuff up. So Marsh Henry tells us to go deeper into Greek roots, cool ones like nim and sar, homonym, pseudonym, dinosaur, sauron. Someone should bring up sauron, even though that's maybe has nothing to do with lizard. Sar means lizard. Dino means terrible lizard. Nim means name. And then she puts a bunch of cool facts out there, like PHTH is pronounced puth, not puth. Am I the only one who thought this? I just talked to someone who also had this problem. I thought this was ophthalmologist and this was diphthong. I would have actually misspelled ophthalmologist as OPTH, but it is actually OPHTH and it is actually pronounced ophthalmologist. And diphthong, ophthalmologist and diphthong. I did not know that until a couple days ago. Oh, look, nothing. Lots of cool activities. She suggests explore this word or explore the connections between these two amazing words. And that should have quotes at the end. She talks about palindromes, activities you can do. She talks about portmanteau activities. And she mentions that chortle is a portmanteau of chortle and snort, which reminds me of this chicken broth that lists chicken flavor as an ingredient of its chicken flavor. So what I want to know, is there chicken flavor in the chicken flavor in the chicken flavor? Because it looks like there might have to be. Anyway, it's all very entertaining. Finally, she talks about cool units for older students. So you could do a unit on calendars, noticing that if sept is 7, oct is 8, nov or non is 9, dec is 10. Why are September, October, November, and December the 9th, 10th, 11th, and 12th months, respectively? That doesn't make any sense. Dec means 10, but December is the 12th month. What's going on? You could research that. I love this. I've never heard of this book, An Exaltation of Larks. It's about names for groups of things, like a murder of crows. And I thought it would be fun to do that in groups. And then your groups could come up with a name for a group of a thing that doesn't have one yet. And you could vote on them, and you can't vote for your own group. I don't know, sounds fun. So here's the problem. This is an incredible joy for me. I get a huge kick out of it. I think it's fun and funny and amazing. And, I often say that math whizzes shouldn't be math tutors a lot of the time, because the student who really needs your help does not identify with thinking this is awesome. So I have to be really careful. I can be enthusiastic, but it needs to be enthusiasm about, in particular, the things I don't know. So I'm modeling curiosity. Otherwise, I'm going to alienate a lot of the students who just hear it as, wait, we have to learn a new thing now? This is already insanely difficult. So I guess the final thing I'm going to say is the reason that the sequential, first this, then this, then this troubles me so much is it reminds me, these assumptions about when you're able to do certain things. It reminds me of the educational triage of special needs, mainstream, gifted. Like every kid is gifted in some ways and has some special needs. Every mainstream kid is gifted in some ways and has some special needs. Every special needs kid, every gifted kid. Everybody's got a spectrum of strengths and challenges. So putting them in a group based on the average of their skills is insane. You're depriving them of enrichment that they deserve and help that they need. So let's not do that in any educational situation. That's not really what I think is being advocated for here. I would like there to be a dance between the understood sequence of the logical structure of the language and the student-led inquiry that builds their interest. And my daughter asked if she could make a thanks for watching thing with a lot of cats on it. And I said yes. Let me know if you need links to anything. I highly recommend WordWorks Kingston, Pete Bowers, very inexpensive lessons on structured wording. Thank you.